And then what I'll do too is if you go into the attendee list on the side and let's see how to do it. Let me, before I say anything, go to the attendee list and hit Jürgen's name. There's a more button, and then I'll make Jürgen co-host. That way, if something happens to your internet, his will be the backup.
Make co-host.
Mm-hmm.
And then do I need to give him permission to share his screen?
I think I have it open.
Yeah,
That's understandable. Okay. Okay, take it away, Jürgen Haas.
Thank you very much. So let's share the screen first. That looks quite right. Okay. So hello, everybody. First of all, thanks for having me. It's a great opportunity to actually present ECA to an audience like yours with so many experienced people. So it's a pretty new development here. We started back in July last year, so it's only about 6 months in development. And let me just introduce the development team for now, which is myself, Richard from Spain, Max from Germany, and Daniel from Germany as well. Unfortunately, this is not a very diverse team yet. So not only with regard to gender, but also language and geography. It just happened that we all come from a very similar area, but we are actually looking for other people to join. But I will talk about participation towards the end of the presentation. So there is a lot of opportunities. So if somebody is interested, we are very, very open to actually welcome new members to the team. The question is, how did it happen that we actually went into a venture like this? And it was that Richard and myself worked for a client, and we still work for that client. It's a big insurance company, and we did an intranet for them on Drupal 7 many, many years ago, and we now have to migrate that over to Drupal 9. And like many other Drupal 7 sites, it's heavy on rules. So there are, you know, it's just unimaginable how many rules are built into that site. And yeah, rules is not quite there yet for Drupal 9 or Drupal 8 either. We looked into all the available opportunities, like, you know, rules itself, business rules, and TR rules, which is kind of a clone of rules. But none of them was actually stable enough. And looking at the contribution side of those modules, it wasn't looking even promising to actually get close to a stable release anytime soon. We considered actually contributing to them, but then we thought, look, in all fairness, they all started development back in Drupal 6 or 7 times, and that was quite a different framework, if it was a framework at the time. The whole software architecture point of view, what you can do since Drupal 8 and now with 9 is so much different, and we just couldn't believe that a migration of such a complex piece of software from the old Drupal 7 times into the new era of Symfony framework would even be possible. So we thought it's time to get a fresh start. And with all the experience from rules and lots of other things, it is so much easier to design something which actually uses all the power of the new framework. And that's what we did. Originally, we thought, let's go for a proof of concept. And only a few weeks after that, we had a look at it and thought, well, that is so promising, let's do more with it. So we introduced it to the Drupal DACH meetup, the German-speaking group, and we published a blog post about it. And only a day later, Daniel and Max contacted us and said, look, we are about to do the same thing. we found yours. Can we join the team instead of doing two things in parallel? And of course, that was great. And we just published the beta 2 release yesterday. So the APIs are pretty solid now. We are not expecting lots of changes. So it's a good time to actually get started and give it a try. We already got some very hopeful feedback from people. Lots of people are looking for, a proper migration path. Like somebody mentioned before, there are so many Drupal 7 sites left. Probably something around 500,000. Not all of them are using rules, but lots of them are waiting for some support, like, for rules. What was funny, actually, when I started discussing that with Richard in summer last year, Matt Clement came up with a Twitter post asking for an idea like that. So I got in touch with him and said, look, we just started working on a POC. And we shared ideas, and he was quite interested. But because of PHP Stan and other stuff he's involved with, he hasn't had time yet to actually contribute to ECA as well. But he likes the idea, obviously. And what Richard came up with, I couldn't remember. Even 5 years ago, we already had a similar idea for a different client, where we wanted to put a BPMN front end in front of the rules module at the time. We couldn't get to it at the time because the client changed strategy. But the idea was in the back of our mind for a pretty long time, and now actually we got it done. I thought let's start with a demo before we go into all the theory, because once you can imagine and see what it really does, it's probably more convenient to also talk about all the other things in the background. So what I've done is I spin up a Drupal 9 site, a fresh installation with the standard profile, adding some extra stuff like the Chin theme and a few other modules. But other than that, it's a really fresh Drupal 9 site. Not using the Olivero theme yet, sorry for that, but I could change that for the next time. In workflow, there is nothing special there. There is no extra content types. It's only article and basic page. And no ECA available yet. I want to show you how easy it is to get started with it because we don't have any dependencies. It's only ECA and Drupal core and one external module, which is called context stack, but that's developed by the same team as well. We just externalized it because it has some purpose which could be used by others as well. If you go into the modules list and search for ECA, then you can see there's quite an extensive list of modules. It is only one module to be downloaded from Drupal.org with Composer required Drupal/ECA. All the others are submodules of it. We distributed that out into submodules so that everybody can just select which pieces they actually need on their Drupal site, so that we don't have to carry all the weight just because everything is in one module. But all you can see here is just not dependent on any contrib module. It's only Drupal core. That was very important, and I talk about in connecting into contrib modules later on as well, because we have a plan for that. Now, instead of enabling them all one by one, I just do that with a drush command so that we have them all enabled. That should be fairly quick. There we go. If I refresh that module page, we can see that everything is now, oh, it's not. There we go. Here you can see all the modules have been enabled now. What you can find then is in workflow, a new item which is called ECA. In the settings for it, you can only find one for now, which is the log level. So you can decide what information from ECA is being written to Watchdog. We keep that on the error level for now. And then we have what we call models. The model is something that is being configured by a front-end tool. I talk about that more in theory later on with the slides, but just for now, keep in mind that ECA is just an engine which operates in the background. It needs models like, you know, some events, some conditions, some actions, which says to which event do you want to react and what do you want to do then. This is defined in models, but ECA itself does not make any decision on how you define those models. This is a completely separate area. We call that the modelers, and there can be more than one. I'm showing you one that we developed already, which is also integrated into Drupal's interface. But don't think that this is the only way to define models. There are lots of other opportunities where you can define your own one, or where probably other communities are hopefully coming up in the future to say, look, this is great, the backend engine is fantastic, but I don't like the UI, I come up with a new one. That is absolutely our intention, so that's what we want to achieve. What we have implemented, I'm a huge fan of BPMN. BPMN is a business process modeling and notation standard. And there are lots of tools around that allow you to define your business models with UIs that implemented it. And a nice one is from a community called Camunda. They have a huge processor which runs on servers, and they have a desktop client for that as well. And what's very nice is that they also maintain a JavaScript library, which is called Bpmnio, which is the same thing as the desktop client, but can be integrated into web applications. And that's what we have done for the Drupal interface. So let's create our first Bpmnio model. If we click on that button, we get still in the Drupal admin UI, we get a canvas which allows us to actually build our model. We give that a name first. You can give it a version so that you know which one you are working on, and we want to make that executable so that ECA is actually, it's like, you know, enabling or disabling an individual model. Then you can simply start by drag and drop, pull an event into here, and now we have to define what that event should be all about. And here comes the integration with ECA. They know something like templates, and our integration is providing each and every event that Drupal knows about into an event template for the Bpmnio modeler. If you open that drop down, you can see there is already a huge list of Drupal events. Some of which we have developed, most of which are part of Drupal.com, Drupal core by itself already. So let's pick one of those events, like probably we want to react on the pre-save content entity event. So every time you save a node, before it's being written to the database, there is a pre-save event. Most of you probably have worked with hooks in the past, in custom modules and stuff like that. So you don't need any hooks in the future. You could just use this one that's using exactly the same mechanism. So we give it a name, pre-save a node, all nodes or just some bundles. But for this one, we just want to react on all of them. The action that we want to execute is probably, and this is another area where, you know, there is an actions module in Drupal core as well. I think it's views bulk operations module, which makes the most use of those actions, but we've utilized them as well. And we make available all the actions that are enabled on this Drupal site. From ECA, but also from core and from all the contrib modules that come with some actions themselves. Like I think CTools is bringing some actions and lots of others as well. So just for the demo here, let's print a message to the user on screen. For the model, we name it a message and we want to say that a node, and here we support tokens as well, that the node with a specific title was pre-saved. We save our model, which was successful. Go back to the list of the models for ECA, and here you can see it got an ID automatically applied. If we go back into the edit, we get back our model that we saved before. Now let's just do exactly what this is all supposed to be doing and create a new article node on this page. No body, nothing else. It's just about the entity itself. Save that. And what we get is exactly the same as before. Oh, an error message, which is unintended. That shouldn't have happened. Oops, that's a demo. Pre-save node. That should be okay. Sorry for that. Okay, let's say it's a content entity. Maybe I forgot to select that one. Let's edit the node. Save it again. And I think the error message should be gone, but we get our extra message, the pre-saved node, my first article, which is the title of this node. Right, cool. Going back and doing some extra stuff, like we probably want to make that node sticky automatically. Make sticky entity. Where is it? Too many actions in the list already. Make selected content sticky. That's one of the actions that comes with Drupal core. Don't need to load that into the token environment, but we want to save the entity afterwards. And we print another message after that. Display message to the user. We save that. We go back to our node. Save it. Oh dear. Yeah, of course, I was fooling myself. While being in pre-save mode, it's not a great idea to actually save your entity to the database, because that is making Drupal running in circles. That can't work. Let's save that. Back to our node. And here we go. We get our original message that we are in pre-save mode and the node was made sticky. Let's control that to see if it actually worked. If we go to the promotion options, there you can see it's been made sticky. Right. I could go on building more of those models here, but that will take too much time. So I thought, why not just preparing some of those models just to give you an idea how complex they could get. And if I go back into the modules list, we also developed some tests, and those tests can come with predefined models which run as kernel tests in the background every time we publish a new release. Yeah, thanks, Martin. And go back to the overview of all the models, and you can see it loaded some of the predefined models here. And for example, an interesting one that resulted from a support request in our ECA issue queue. Somebody asked, well, is it possible with ECA? Let's imagine I delete a node and I want to create an automatic redirect just in case somebody is calling that URL sometime in the future. And we said, yeah, why not? So what we are doing here is we react to the event of a node delete event. We create an entity, give it a name, redirect. The entity type is a redirect entity. We give that a token name so that we can refer to that entity in future steps of this model. The language code is undefined. And the entity label is ECA created for node entity. The source path for it is the node/entity ID. The destination in this case goes to internal contact. We give it a title of null. This is because the schema of the redirect module requires that. And then we set a status code of 301, which is used if that redirect applies. So let's give that one a try. First of all, if we look into the URL redirects, that should be empty, correct. Now, if we go to the content overview and delete our first article, yeah, I really want to do that. The article is gone, and if we go back to the redirect list, we can see that a redirect was created for node 1 going to contact. Not that it makes sense, but it actually operates on that model. Let's have a look into one more before we go back to, seems like I can't click that zoom widget away. Yeah, now that works. For example, we can work with views. That's a nice one. So in a model, in this case, if cron is running, we want to switch user to user 1. Here we provide the ID. This is necessary because cron runs with the anonymous user account, and the anonymous user account has no access to the view that we want to operate. The view we want to work with is the user admin people. which is the user list. We give that a token name as well called user list. So what happens there is the view is being executed and the result set of that view is put onto the token environment with a name that you can provide, which in this case is the user list. And after that, we then trigger a custom event with the ID X1 and tell it that it should operate on the user list. And just because user list is not an individual entity, but a list of entities, it knows that it should run in a loop automatically and trigger the custom event X1. And the X1 event is this one, has the same ID. And it just prints a message with the name of the entity that it's been given. So if we want to try that as well, we can run cron just in the UI. And there we go. We just get messages like user max and user admin, which is exactly the list of users that exists on this page. Yeah, there we go. That's the same view. So this is just to give you some ideas on how it looks and feels if you actually work with it. Let's go back to the slides because I want to give you some architectural background, which should probably help us to further discuss details and questions that are certainly coming up in your mind. So ECA is just a processor, period. It's a backend system. Everything you saw in the UI is not ECA, that is a separate module. We care about that as well, but it's important to understand that those are two different things. And ECA subscribes to all Drupal events and triggers the processor. And the processor itself looks into all available ECA models that are available on this Drupal site and sees if it needs to be doing something, etc. And all those ECA models are config entities. So that means with CMI, you can develop your models, you can push them upstream, you can copy them to other Drupal sites, and so on and so forth. The question is, where do those config entities come from? And ECA itself doesn't care about that at all. It comes from the modeler, the UI system, or you can write them by hand, or you can create them by an external application, whatever you like. The config file is YAML, that is a hierarchical structure defining events, conditions, and actions, and that's it. Everything else is logic in the processor of ECA. So the components of the processor are all the Drupal events. Conditions, we provide an ECA provided plugin manager for conditions. As a side note, there is already a condition plugin manager in Drupal core, and we thought we should use that as well because our philosophy is always don't develop something that's already there, just utilize APIs that exist. We have to say the condition manager from Drupal core is not really ready for production, to be honest. It is the condition manager which is currently only used for the block conditions, where you can define which block is being visible on which page or for which user role and other conditions, if you like. But this condition manager is so focused on just blocks that if we implemented that and used that plugin manager, but it just creates confusing results. So we had to decide to come up with our own. But for actions, we are using all the actions that come from Drupal core's plugin manager and from all the config modules. If you are familiar with BPMN, there is also something like gateways. A gateway is something like, if you have an event, you then define something like, a condition, and you can then say, if the condition is true, do one action, and if the condition is false, do another action. And this piece over here is called a gateway. That's not really a condition in itself. So that's why we mentioned that as a separate thing. It's kind of extended conditions, but the name ECA doesn't contain a G because it's just a minor object, if you like. So what's already included in ECA? It's the processor itself. It's the plugin managers for modulars, events, and conditions. The action plugin manager is the one that comes with Drupal core. We have lots of interfaces, abstract base classes, and traits for developers of ECA itself, but also for other developers in the contrib space who want to integrate with ECA. Then we integrate all the actions from Drupal core. We have the separate module called context stack. That was an idea of Max. He developed that module by himself. So every time we do something by the processor, we determine what is our current context, like which user is the active user, what is in memory, what is in the token stack, etc., etc. And then we push that into a context, and that can be nested. That's why it's called the context stack. And once an action is completed, we just restore the context which was available right before we started operating on entities or other things, which is extremely powerful, especially if you think about that we can also enqueue actions so that they will be operated later on. And then it's particularly important that we provide all the context to the queue item as well, so that it can operate on all the tasks that have been available at the time when has been queued. We also heavily cache everything around ECA so that you don't get performance hits. We support loops, intensive logging. We give you access to the states environment of Drupal. We support all parts of tokens and many more things. We actually prevent recursions. Imagine that if you want to react, for example, on the entity update event, and you change a field of that entity and save that, that triggers another update entity event. And if you are not careful, that would run in circles forever. But ECA is preventing that and is providing log information if your model is doing something like that to help you getting rid of it. We also support typed data. So for example, if you want to change entity fields and you have a complex field like the body field comes with a value component and a format component. And it's very easy with the token system and typed data to have access to all components of all of the fields and all of the field types as well. We also provide a tagging system for events to characterize them, to give you some hints whether, like, for example, some of the events may not be triggered if you are in a production environment with a CDN in front of it, because the view entity might not be triggered because the request from the website visitor doesn't actually reach the Drupal site. And the tagging system helps us to give you some hints that this is the case. And we also provide some tests. We are not quite as good as we want to be. So that's one of the tasks that we are going to spend some time in the upcoming weeks, because testing that system, as complex as it is so important so that we don't break anything if we develop more features. We then also have 10 submodules so far, which are packaged with ECA. I don't need to go into them one by one. I think they are speaking for themselves. Yeah, I think that's about the submodules. And we are preparing support for contrib modules. So there are quite a few, like entity share, the address module, feeds, the flag system, LDAP, Simple News, Web Forms, all of them already have events and actions that come with them. And we are encouraging their maintainers to actually interface with the ECA system as well, so that out of the box, if ECA and those submodules, those contrib modules are installed, they just work together without the site builder having to do anything. And I'm sure, you know, this is just a list that we came up with where we know they have events and or actions already. But there are hundreds, if not thousands of other modules that could potentially integrate with ECA as well. And doing so is not difficult. Writing an event for ECA is just a few lines of code, very, very easy. Let's quickly talk about chainable actions. We have been there before, like, you know, I was talking about recursion. If you have the entity update event, you save an entity as an action as well, you would run in circles. Now, unfortunately, preventing a recursion like that is easy. The problem was that the entity field value change actions that come with Drupal core, like, for example, make a node sticky or promote a node to the front page or whatever, they are built in a way that without a choice, they always call a node save afterwards. And that would break functionality. But we found a way to actually come around that by aliasing that class from Drupal core, which is the field update action base. So what we've done is we've just defined an alias for that one, which is our own coming from ECA content, field update action base, which does exactly the same thing, except that if it operates inside of the ECA context, it just avoids to call the node save function. So that was a pretty interesting one. And I thought that might be of interest for some of you. Just for those who think about probably looking deeper into the code, some structure overview on the events. There is quite a few here, don't need to go in. Events are not that exciting anyways. The structure for conditions, that's pretty interesting because, for example, we do have a condition base that comes with ECA. All the other stuff above over here comes from Drupal core. So we are just leveraging all of that. But then we also have something like a string comparison base, which lots of other conditions just are subclasses of, like comparing entity field values with another string, or comparing a form field value with something, or do something with ECA state. They all subclass that string comparison base and lots more. Like, for example, you know, if you have entity references in place, you can either compare the current entity field value with something, or you can just refer to that with referenced entity and compare a field value of theirs with something else. And last but not least, the structure overview for actions, that's even more complex. Like, you know, we have configurable action base and a views query. That's the one we used for getting the user list. And then there is even another subclass of that, which even allows you to export that result from the views query into a file, and then take the file to do other stuff with the content later on. Right, that's it so far for ECA as the processor, as the background system. Now let's talk about modelers. Modelers are the UI things, and that's important for all of us using the system, defining the rules, the models, and so on and so forth. So I think we've touched on this already. What I've shown you so far is a modeler based on BPMN, but it doesn't have to be BPMN. If there is another system that allows you to define rules based on events, conditions, and actions. It should be very simple to actually integrate that with ECA. Two of which we have already integrated. The first one is the Camunda desktop client. By the way, I'm providing a link to the slides later on, and then you have access to all the links and can actually click on them and go to them and download stuff and so on and so forth. This is integrated with the Camunda BPMN module, which is available on Drupal.org. And the desktop client is, I think it's Java-based and runs on all the operating systems like Windows, Mac, and Linux. Another one is the one that you saw in action, which is BPMNio, JavaScript library, which is developed and maintained by the same people who also maintain the Camunda desktop client. The structure of the modular classes, that's an easier one. We have a modular base. On top of that, we have the modular BPMN base, and the two integrated clients are both subclassing that one. So yeah, that's about it. Not very much code in there. It's just about reading files, saving config, and telling ECA what are the events, the conditions, and the actions, and all of their properties. That's about it, what a modular has to do. But as I mentioned before, there could be others. Like, you know, we were looking into Node-RED. Node-RED is a great interface that allows templating as well. So we could provide widgets for all the Drupal events and conditions and actions. I could imagine that even plant UML or other UML flavors could be used for things like that. Mind maps could be used. Plain text like YAML or JSON files. I know that Max's company is about to write a client for that. And maybe you have other suggestions yourself. So let's discuss about that. Now, let's step back a little bit again, like what have been the objectives of ECA? The original objectives was to provide a rules equivalent for Drupal 9 and beyond, of course. But we achieved a bit more than that, which was unintended, but it turned out to be pretty powerful, and I just want to mention those as well. We can reduce the number of modules that you may need for your Drupal sites in the future. Like, for example, it's very likely that you don't need a custom module anymore. In our company, we very often have to write a custom module just because we have to hook into something to modify, let's say, a form, or to validate a form, or to render something in a particular way, or to automatically change an entity field value. We don't have to do that in the future anymore. We just come up with a very simple ECA model for that. Form altering, specific needs for cron and queuing tasks, etc. But we can reduce the number of modules by other means as well, like, for example, the redirect to the login page, redirect after login, depending on roles, the max length modules, field validation, computed fields, auto entity label, and all the other modules for stripping or trimming content and stuff like that. We often used dozens of those, but we don't have to anymore because we can just do all of that inside of ECA. But also what we achieved as well is transparency for business owners. With our insurance client, they were very excited because now people who understand the business logic of an insurance company, they most likely have no idea about Drupal itself, but they know about BPMN. So they were very excited that we now provide them with a tool where they can participate in configuring the logic of Drupal, of their intranet, and maintaining that as well without having to learn all about Drupal. So that was very exciting, as well as the fact that we now have a solid workflow, because all of this is saved in entities, in config entities. And because of that, we can revision those. We can apply a moderation workflow so that somebody has to review the model before it's been applied to a production site, for example. And you can have different versions of a model, and then you can track what has changed over time for specific models of itself. So, what does our roadmap look like? We published Beta 1 in November last year, only 4 months after we started development. So that was a very quick turnaround, we believe. We just published Beta 2 yesterday. So feel free to download from Drupal.org and give it a try. And we really want to publish our first stable 1.0 release in early 22. So that's probably sometime within the first quarter, in the next few weeks, I should say. We believe that we are almost feature complete for 1.0. So what we now need to do is write documentation, write more tests, clean up some code, and so on and so forth. So there's not much feature development that we have to do in the next few weeks. Here are the links to the relevant modules on Drupal.org, and we do have a Drupal Slack channel as well. Feel free to join. There we host bi-weekly team meetings. That's always on Wednesdays. We've had our last one last week, so the next one should be next week, which is the January 19th. This is at 4 p.m. UTC, which is in your time zone, I guess, 7 in the morning, pretty early, I'm afraid. Yeah, so how can you participate? Of course, development is always on top of the list, but there is so much more, as always, writing tests, reviewing what we are doing, providing us with feedback. And when I spoke about the team at the beginning with the 4 developers, that's actually unfair, because there have been a few people already joining us on the issue queue, like Ralph did, and a few others providing very, very valuable feedback, raising concerns, having ideas, feature requests, and stuff like that. That's very, very important. We have to have a lot of documentation. Translations are an issue, and we also have to work on ideas how to improve the UI, which is outside of ECA. But let's go back for a second. If you see this UI, like for example, we trigger an event, we have all of this UI is provided by the JavaScript library, which comes from the Camunda guys. Now, this interface is not good enough for a user who doesn't actually know all the details about ECA in the background. I know exactly, I have to write the user list name here, which has been introduced over here in the different action as a token name. But how does a regular user know about this? They actually can't. So our idea is that we build a team which will be focusing on UI stuff in the future by enhancing the BPMN IO UI over here, by hooking into that and providing more Drupal specific details, and hopefully also field widgets to make the usage of this UI much easier. And the nice thing is that the Camunda community already reached out to us when they realized that we are developing this, and said this is so exciting for them, and they offered help. And they said if we have any needs to make this more usable, they are very open to actually help us make that possible. But you can imagine that the team developing ECA is already very busy with the background tasks. So I would really hope that we can build a separate team which is going to focus on UI things, because this is a task on its own. And even more so, and that's why I'm here today, please help us spread the word. I think a lot of people in the Drupal community need to know about this, and we hope you can tell them, give it a try, give us feedback, and yeah, let's see where this is going. Thanks a lot, and now let's discuss, come up with your questions.
I'm not super familiar with people I'm not super familiar with rules, but how would you say this for someone that is familiar with rules or uses rules? How would you say this is an improvement over that?
Feature-wise, I think we already cover everything that rules did in the past. Mm-hmm. With regard to the UI, I think we are a bit behind with the field widgets, you know, the rules module, because it just operates inside of Drupal itself. It knows all about the dependencies and can provide drop-down lists for the context where you are currently doing some configuration stuff. Mm-hmm. We don't have that yet, but everything else, I believe we have already covered.
If you're a moderately good developer, or like moderately good developer, how hard would you say it is to extend this application?
It was breaking up a bit. Did you ask how easy it is to extend the system?
Yeah.
Very easy. Writing an action plugin, I can give you an example if you like. It's probably telling you more than any words that explains it. So if we go into the content, ECA content submodule, we have action plugins like, for example, create or set a field value. Although that's probably already one of the more no, that's an easy one. That's a simple one. So what it does is you define a default configuration. What we need for setting a field value is a field name and a field value, and a few other default configuration which we inherit from the parent class. And then we have to provide a get fields to update function. And that's about it. The build configuration form is only used if the action is used in Drupal UI as well, like, for example, bulk actions on the node list, if you like, as well as the submit. So in terms of ECA, this is all you need to write to have a new plugin.
Cool.
And the same goes for, let's say, conditions, for example. If you want to come up with your own condition, like, for example, we want to know if the entity that we are working with is a new one. So we have some annotation at the beginning, which is used for templating for the UI. And then you only have to provide an evaluate method, which takes the entity from the context. If it's an entity interface object, then the result is the entity is new. That's the function which comes from the entity API. And then we check if the configuration for that plugin was negating the result. And that's what we return. In the UI, if you wonder, let's say we define a condition here, and we want to find out is the entity is new. That's the condition we want to use. Mm-hmm. And here you have a drop down which says negate the condition yes or no. And here we can say which of the entities that might be in context of this model should be used. Otherwise, it uses the topmost entity, which was used by triggering the event. So that's all you need to write a condition like that. Of course, there are more complex ones, like
Right.
is a field value empty? Well, not too much. We only need to define what's the field name to be used. Then we call the isEmpty function from the field API. That's all.
That's good. Looks simple.
No, it's interesting, Jürgen. We had, gosh, I guess it was before COVID. So I guess it was probably 3 years ago now, but we had somebody come and present on a module called If Then Else. Are you familiar with that? Yeah, and it reminds me of this just in terms of the UI, of course, but yeah.
Actually, we looked into that module as well, and it felt a bit too Drupal 7 like as well at the time, but that was long ago. So I might be wrong. They may have changed things ever since, but the structure wasn't what we wanted to have for the way forward.
Yeah, it doesn't look like they got much adoption so far. It looks like there's only about 150 sites using it, but
yeah.
But it was
well, that's 5 times more than we have.
Touche. Wow, this is fantastic. Good work, you guys. Oh my God. That looks like a lot of work.
Yeah, we've been very busy, to be honest. But we have been in a lucky situation as well, because all the participants have been funded by custom work. So it was much easier than in other scenarios to actually spend time on developing this, because the clients paid for it. Not all of it, but a significant portion. So that's just great. And we are so thankful for the clients that they allowed us to do that as open source and publish that on Drupal.org. Because I think that's hopefully a good contribution for the community moving forward.
Looks like Oliver has a question. Go ahead, Oliver.
Hey. This looks awesome, first of all. I kind of had it sounds like in many ways the use case for this is providing kind of business logic to users that might not know code to be able to achieve some of these goals that you outlined, which, yeah, as you said, is very similar to the purpose of rules. One of the downfalls of rules was basically the reverse of that, where it like hid a bunch of business logic in the UI. And so a developer who maybe didn't work on the site would come in and try and fix something. And then all the business logic was hidden in some UI somewhere. And it actually kind of, in some cases, had the reverse effect of making the site harder to manage. So I was just curious, so on the obvious side, because it's using Drupal 8, Drupal 9, because the approach to programming is different, because you've extended classes differently, there is a sense in which that is slightly easier to maintain, like because it's in code and et cetera. But I guess just maybe can you speak to some of the thoughts you've given to to making this kind of maintainable on a development team for the life cycle of a project like the one you're working on?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I know exactly where you're coming from. I've seen that myself as well. You know, it's horrible if you have dozens of rules and they probably conflict with each other, and it's almost impossible to find out what's going wrong and so on. Even if you defined the rules yourselves, you know, after a few weeks, you just forget about what you've been doing.
Yes, I'm not going to lie, that happened to me too.
Yeah. Well, yeah, we've given that a lot of thought. First of all, we believe that a visual structure like this makes it easier to understand what's going on. That's the first step. So the visual part of the rule set helps you break down what's going on, why, when. On top of that, I was showing you the setting for ECA where you can define the log level. If you go to debug, what it will do actually for everything it does, like, you know, finding out which event has been triggered. Do I have to do something? Does the condition apply, which has been defined here? Which action has been executed with which parameters, and so on and so forth. All of that is being logged as individual log messages in Watchdog. And with that information being available, we can, at some time, if helpful, provide a kind of a report telling you what happened, when and why, and what did not happen and why, because all of that is being logged. So that should already help to debug things. But there is another very important issue in our issue queue, which we call dry run. So what we want to offer, hopefully before version 1 is going to be released, is an opportunity that you can run your models with live data, creating a report, what has happened, without actually changing the data itself. At the beginning, we thought we are going to do that with kind of a database transaction stuff where we just prevent the system writing physically to the database. But then we realized that when writing tests for ECA, we were able to spin up a Drupal site, which, you know, PHP unit test does it already. It comes up with a blank Drupal site, loads some modules, creates some fake data, and then runs whatever you want it to run. And we can run ECA models in a context like that. And now the missing piece is only how do we get access to the live data, like probably cloning the data of your production site into a separate database and then run unit tests with your ECA models and writing a clear report on what has happened and checking if everything that you expected actually came out as a result of it. Mm-hmm. And we believe that with those tools together, you have a fair chance of actually debugging your models. I still believe debugging is necessary because I've seen it myself. You write something in BPMNio and then it just doesn't do what you want. You have to find out why. And then those tools are actually very helpful for that.
That's awesome. Yeah, debugging is definitely one of the best ways to help unravel when something isn't going right. So yeah, that's great. Thanks for that.
I had a question about all the submodules. So, like, you know, I saw one, you know, the one called ECA migrate. So what's in that? Is that basically just actions related to migration, to the migrate module? Is that?
That's it. I can't remember myself what exactly is in there. So let's just have a look. There are, in this case, just a couple of events. Migrate doesn't come with actions, but it comes with some events, like, you know, migrate fires an event if they save a message to the ID map. And that means to that event, you can just hook into that and do extra stuff. If a map gets deleted, if a map gets saved, post import, post rollback. So those are all the events that come with the migrate module. And we just make them accessible to the ECA framework with that submodule.
That definitely got me thinking, is there a way to make this an official successor of rules, like where you could migrate from a site that used rules to using this? But I imagine that would be a massive undertaking with the complexities. So probably not worth it.
Well, guess what? There is an issue for that. Migrate rules to ECA.
Doesn't surprise me.
Oh, I'm skeptical we can do that, but we will analyze it. It might be possible to some extent. I'm not sure.
I mean, there's some ways in which the key components of this do map to things that happen in rules for obvious reasons. But
definitely.
Yeah, I can't imagine it being too easy.
I think the problem is, what expectation do you create if you provide a solution like that? You know, people may expect that you get a one-to-one copy of your previous rules in ECA, and I'm not sure if we can actually make that promise.
Yeah, also most people would be probably coming from like a D7 site or something like that at this point. So like, they're already re-architecting, they're already building new, new content types and new logic. So it would be a little, probably not a ton of useful examples where it would make sense to just push a button and have it work automatically.
Yeah.
Are there any other questions or comments or?
Very nice presentation.
Well, I'm going to go ahead and turn recording off now, but we can hang out for a few minutes. I'll go ahead and turn that off.
So I stop sharing.